Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krista Sineski. I'm a marketing director with EloQuest Healthcare, and we're so pleased to have you here for one of our Wednesday workshops. This is a format that's designed to quickly share expertise from some clinical experts with the goal of giving you evidence-based information and actionable resources to support improved outcomes at your facilities. Today is the third and final installment of our 20-minute short presentations in a three-part series entitled Vascular Access Jamboree, a how-to guide. Our presenter for the series is once again expert in infection prevention, Michelle Shelley DeVries. As we round out this series, this specific topic we're focusing on today is post-implementation monitoring. If you missed the first or second presentation in this series, recordings are available to get you caught up. You can access that through our Wednesday workshop event page. We will post a link to access that in our chat. So before I hand it over to our presenter, Shelley DeVries, there are a couple of housekeeping notes I want to go through as folks are getting logged in, for those that may be new to our series or to our platform. First, I want to let you know that we do have the audience's audio automatically muted, and that's to make sure that our presenter's audio comes through to you as clearly as possible. That said, we do want to encourage, interaction with our audience that we can. So for any questions that you have, you can type those into the question box in your control panel. If it's a technical question or an audio question, one of our EloQuest team members will address that as soon as possible. Questions for Shelley can be submitted at any time throughout her presentation. They will be held until the end of the presentation, and we'll address as many as we can in a limited time that we have. Also, there are a couple of audience poll questions that Shelley has prepared throughout her presentation. Please interact with these poll questions as they appear on your screen. We'll all get to see the aggregate of the results as they're submitted in real time. And finally, you do have a free downloadable resource available to you to accompany this presentation. Shelley has prepared a brainstorming guide, a tool for discussion to help you and your team establish priorities or areas where you're seeking quality improvement as you perform bedside rounding. So you can find this resource in the handout section of the control panel as well. So with that housekeeping out of the way, we're ready to move to the presentation. I know many of you are acquainted with our presenter and have been following along with our series. We do have some new attendants here today, so I do want to take a minute to just give her her proper introduction. Mrs. Shelley DeVries has been involved in infection prevention and hospital epidemiology for more than 25 years, spanning community, university, and federal healthcare facilities. She's authored numerous peer-reviewed journal articles and textbook chapters. She was a reviewer for the 2016 as well as the 2021 Infusion Therapy Standards of Practice. She's an adjunct research fellow with AVATAR, the Alliance for Vascular Access Teaching and Research, and she also serves the Association for Vascular Access both nationally on the board of directors as well as locally, serving as co-president of her local network chapter, Hoosier Van. So as you can tell, with all of this experience, she is particularly passionate about raising awareness around quality improvement and vascular access device infection prevention. And we're so fortunate that she devotes her time to education on these topics, and we're grateful to have her here with us today. So with that, we welcome you, Shelley DeVries. I'll give the controls to you.
Thanks, Krista, and hi, everybody. So I'm so glad to have a chance to come back and do this third and final session of our how-to guide on Vascular Access Jamboree, focus on post-implementation monitoring today. And I do always need to state explicitly, as Krista mentioned, I am part of the board of directors with AVA. It's important that I let you know that the views presented today are mine and mine alone and do not represent those of the Association for Vascular Access unless otherwise stated. So with that, kind of recapping where we've been, this is our third in 2-week intervals discussion about what we've been doing in my organization for our Vascular Access Jamboree. We started with a discussion of where to start. So who do you bring to your team? Why are you getting together? What are some of the sort of structural considerations over how often to meet, the kind of questions you're going to have, developing a data dictionary? Step 2 last time was about collecting data and actually starting to implement change. And today we're looping back in, talking about the importance of post-implementation monitoring. When you think about what we call our vascular access jamboree or any quality audits you do that take place at the bedside, what we're getting each time is really just a snapshot. It's different days, different shifts, different team members, different devices. And then, did they know you were coming? So for us, as we look to scheduling, and we do this monthly, we try to pick different days of the week. We look at different shifts. Sometimes we will come right at the end of midnight shifts, so we get a reflection of what happened overnight or what happened over the weekend. We know there's variation in the staff who work those teams, and sometimes in what the different practices are based on your organizational policies and procedures. We want to make sure we're getting a comprehensive overview to the best of our ability about what's going on. I say we have a different team because we know doing this every month that we will not always have every member from our organization present, every vascular access device representative included on an individual month. But we bring in fresh faces frequently, and if you're not with us this month, we know you'll be back with us next month. So we have some flex and some flux in what we see with our group who's rounding. And I say different devices because this is a snapshot in time. And we have had times when we've rounded and had almost no central lines present. We've had other times when we have had a significant number. And so maybe we'll have more ports or maybe we'll have more trialysis. So for us, the importance of coming back month after month or internally day after day or week after week is so we get that broad representation of what's being seen. One of my questions ends with, did you know they were coming, or did they know you were coming? Because it's like teaching to the test. When we know our regulatory or accreditation folks have arrived in an institution, it's not uncommon for everyone to scatter and do all the spruce up that we know makes a difference. But when we're coming to do a quality improvement round, it's so important to me to see what the practices really are. I love it that people care that we're coming and they're going to go through and make sure that all their dressings are changed and all their tubings are dated and everything looks perfect. But that is not necessarily a representation of the reality that was there the shift before, the day before. So we think it's really important that we get that real representation of what's going on. So with that, moving to my first poll question, when you're conducting clinical audits at the bedside, do you announce your schedule in advance? So where you're going to be and what time you're going to be there? This is just a curiosity. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so the majority, 79% of you say no, you don't announce it, about 21% saying yes. Thank you so much for sharing what we find. And we do so much different rounding in our organization. When we want our leadership there with us, actually our unit-based managers, we know there's a benefit to scheduling in advance so that they can have the time blocked on their calendar and they can join us. And that really is important. But when we're doing our group rounding like this, we feel much more, and this is our personal opinion, much more determined to try to go without that announcement. So it's just different ways for different reasons. We actually do them both. But for the purpose of our Jamboree, it is unannounced to the individual unit managers. But that's our design, our preference. So continuous quality improvement, and I did take a little bit of liberties here in how I interpret the PDCA cycle. But as we walk through what we've been doing, so our planning was our first session on this. Let's have a Jamboree. Let's decide that we are going to gather key stakeholders, both those from within our organization and those that support us through the products that we use on our patients. Let's determine what we're going to look at, the frequency of how we're going to look at it, determine a data dictionary, and understand how we will use the data that we gather. Our do is we actually gathered a team and we got together at the bedside, we walked together, we learned, and we asked tough questions. And now we're to the check. We're going to come back and we're going to do it again. So this is every single month. I've been transparent, we did have a hiatus for part of COVID, but normally, and we're certainly back in the pattern of coming back and doing it every month. But that act is truly the most important part, and that's how we end every Jamboree. We spend a half an hour to an hour debriefing essentially what we've learned and coming up with a plan for what do we need to do different. Because coming in and bean counting, measuring month after month after month, reporting the same things, without a plan for improvement that gets threaded throughout the organization to the frontline staff through leadership so that we know we can make a difference. Because part of our justification for doing this vascular access jamboree is knowing that if we can fix the processes, we are confident that our outcomes will follow. So always making sure that we're not just doing the rounds and we're not just discussing amongst ourselves, but we're coming up with that plan for what we will do differently before we gather again the following month. So when we look at this from the frame of the 2021 Infusion Therapy Standards of Practice on the importance of post-implementation monitoring. So for me, Standard 12, which is product evaluation through my lens, which is probably not explicitly how the standard was thinking of it, is an ongoing process. And the need to have our clinician end users involved in the evaluation of the vascular access devices and products. So part of what we do when we're out doing our rounds, doing our jamboree, is engaging with the nurses at the bedside, finding out if we find something that isn't meeting our expectations or what we expected to see on how a product was being used or applied to a patient. It's our chance to really engage with the staff and find out why they're struggling or why they made a decision they made. We have learned some amazing things by talking with our frontline staff when we had questions over how we saw things. And this also helps with Standard 12.2 that our clinician end users attain and maintain knowledge about developments in technology. So during our process of rounding, we're doing just-in-time education. We usually end every unit tour with a huddle of staff whenever they're available or one-on-one interactions with the individual caregivers so that we can hand off any findings we had, have a chance to answer questions, and help them learn new things or things that they weren't already aware of about the products that are in use. So a great way to make sure we're doing continual education. And then, as I mentioned, our ACT part on the end is figuring out how we can take the information we learned during our rounds and thread it throughout the organization. Continuing on in product evaluation and quality improvement, and these two standards really go hand in hand. So on the evaluation side, and to me, again, it's ongoing evaluation, is that we have to establish clear goals of what's going to be measured and evaluated. So for us, it was originally our data dictionary. We define the elements we're going to measure based on our organizational priorities. We determine how they will be measured, what our options are for recording findings, and have an actual purpose for why we're doing it. So to enhance continuity of care, reduce a complication, that's going to vary based on which element is being considered. And then having the data collection tools, not just for your initial product evaluation as far as a pilot or a trial, but that ongoing monitoring. That dovetails for us into quality improvement, ensuring that we're evaluating those indicator outcomes, including close calls. So doing the rounds at the bedside, instead of waiting for a poor outcome, waiting for a CLABSI or a CABSI or a DVT or an occlusion, if we catch these things, if we can look at what's going on at the bedside and review something before it causes harm, we're able to essentially deal with a close call or a near miss and correct that practice before it reaches the level of patient harm. Planning for sustainability at the outset of a quality improvement project, this is where we define with our team, is monthly reasonable? Do we think people can commit that 3 or 4 hours every single month to travel in and work with us? And we give it the flexibility that every vendor partner is allowed to bring 2 individuals. That allows us to have variability in the individuals that come. We have nursing representation. We have at times had medical representation. We have product reps. We have engineers. We've had executives come with, because everybody brings a unique perspective. And that also allows it not to fall on the shoulders of just one person. We can really maximize the impact and maximize the influence by allowing this to vary in response to our needs and also in response to the individual partner needs. Audit and feedback when implementing change. This is exactly what we're out there doing. We're trying to see where our opportunities are. We give the feedback to the individual staff. We enter it into our quality improvement database so that we can see trends at the unit level, at the device level, and then organization-wide. We can use that feedback in our ongoing reports, which go to our infection control committee, our quality clinical work group, our leadership performance improvement, our shared governance. So it's a consistent way to measure what's going on in our care so that we can then use it to drive our outcomes. just quickly walking through, and I've shared this previously, but how we've done the continuous monitoring. Originally, it was a product evaluation to solve an opportunity we saw in our outcomes. We evaluated a number of different dressings, trying to reduce our amount of disrupted dressings. In our very small pilot, we found that by adding gum mastic to either of our available dressings, we were able to dramatically increase our fully intact dressings and completely eliminate, in these small samples, exposed insertion sites. From there, we went to implementation, and you could see represented here in August 2017. That was our initial implementation, focusing only on peripheral IVs. As we expanded our use of the gum mastic throughout the organization, it's also when we broadened our process measures. We expanded the teams that were out looking. We made sure we had unit-based individuals making observations of what was going on in their patients. And we added our vascular access Jamboree. So month after month after month, we brought experts in to help us review what was going on at the bedside. And we continued to see where we had variation and where we had consistency in our practices. And this is just one example of the data that we evaluate during our Jamboree, but it's what we have the most robust information on. We take that information to drive change. So it's not just that an individual snapshot, where I mentioned a snapshot, a moment in time, that day we go, but we add that to our aggregated database so we can take a look at what our trends are, as I mentioned, by device, by unit, and by quarter. And so what we saw here was that as we evolved into our first full year, so moving out of that first full year and into the second year, we started seeing some differences in our observations, and our numbers dropped slightly, still significantly above what our baseline was, and actually significantly above what our target was, but we saw something changed. And what we realized there is that as our professional development and our infection prevention had pretty much become, I call them dressing whisperers. So they had looked at literally tens of thousands of dressings at that point. We began to become more sophisticated in how we evaluated a non-intact dressing. And what crept into our numbers was actually variation in our definition, as we began to realize it wasn't just about an adherent dressing on four corners, but if the securement strip wasn't placed appropriately, it actually left the whole bottom section of the dressing non-intact or exposed. So learning from our numbers and realizing where we had variation in our practice. And this is a really, really unattractive slide, but to begin to show you how we use that data, that repeated information, that coming back month after month after month. And so as those data sets grow, we're able to look not only at an individual type like a peripheral IV versus a central line, but we drill down to anatomical site, insertion site when it comes to central lines, temporary or permanent devices, tunneled or non-tunneled. So we can really go to that planning and that acting stage for what do we need to do differently. So it's pretty simple yet sophisticated at the same time, and that repetition, that post-implementation monitoring, and coming back every single month to see what we can do better. We will always be learning. We will always, hopefully, be improving. So I've mentioned that we've been doing this for years, and we think it's a really, really great way to maximize the expertise available to us, bring some world experts to our frontline staff so that they can ask questions, they can show where their struggles are, and we can all get better together. But have we actually made any changes? Have we made improvements? Well, we have shared and we've actually published the difference we have seen in our dressing integrity, starting at only 55% and now being consistently maintained north of 90%. That was through our audit and feedback cycles, which identified an opportunity for quality improvement and have allowed us to implement and continue to monitor. We've changed policies. When we see things that fall out of alignment with what we expect, it's a chance for us to do that critical review. So going back to the CDC guidelines, going back to the INS standards, doing a literature review, and then listening to our staff for where they have recommendations. And we have changed small things and we've changed very large things in our policies and procedures based on things that we find, identify, and are able to correct as part of our ongoing quality improvement. With that, we've changed practices. Through direct observation, we find things that you will never get from a chart review. And when we have found variation in practice or workarounds, however you like to view them, it gives us a chance to address the why. People do things out of necessity or maybe not knowing that there's a better way to do it. So it gives us a chance to work as a team to help find what drove us to make some decisions. And number one, sometimes we agree with, wow, we never thought about doing it that way. Another time it's a chance to go ahead and do some just-in-time education and then go and do additional auditing to see if this was an isolated incident or something that's happened more broadly. It has definitely increased our collaboration. Nancy Scott, my secret sauce, my partner in infection prevention, and I have always worked very closely together. But through this process, the relationships we have fostered and strengthened with our frontline staff, with our incredible professional development department, and also feeding this information back up through every level of leadership, as well as building that trust with our industry partners, everything we can learn from them, it has made us all better, giving us a stronger understanding of the decisions that are being made by our staff. We bring in the best products we know to, we write the best policies, so we believe, and procedures, and we roll them out in the best way we know how. But when that doesn't get implemented at the bedside in the way we thought, it helps us understand where we can do better so we can help our staff do better. And then finally, optimizing our product use. We have learned by bringing the engineers to the bedside with us, by bringing the individuals who design the products we use, and understanding what that real world implementation looks like, because that could be a lot different than being in a lab. We've heard that direct feedback from our staff on why they've made the choices, and it's helped us improve the teaching that we do, the procedures that we write, and I know it's been incredibly valuable to our industry partners who join us as well, because then they can learn how to improve the products that they're bringing. So one more question for you. It's August 2021. The infusion therapy standards came out in January. Are there still elements in those 2021 standards that you have not yet been able to introduce to your organization? So yes, no, or probably, but I'm still reading them. Well, thank you for your honesty, and I'm right there with you. Yeah, there are so many things in the standards that we're still working to implement. We've gone through and we've done our revisions of major policies and procedures, but it is a continual work in process. It is a beast of a document, and we read through them in the infection prevention team on day one. We actually spent an obscene amount of time to see where our biggest opportunities were, but we will continue to work through them. We will continue to refine our practices, and we go back to that document whenever we see an opportunity for improvement to make sure we are using the latest evidence to guide the practices at our organization for our patients. So those of you who said no, I am wildly impressed, because if that means what I think it is, you have mastered the standard of practice. You've brought everything into an alignment, and hopefully that means your outcomes are absolutely phenomenal. So hats off to those of you who have made it through and implemented everything. I'm very envious. And then that really brings us to the download that Krista mentioned. So this is super simple, but I've heard so much feedback from those of you who've hopped on over the last month or so with me, like, how do you pick your priorities? So this is really just another brainstorming sheet. And I want to be clear, I put CABSI on there. That's not a typo. And for all of you who have finished the infusion therapy standards of practice, it's no longer just about central line associated bloodstream infections. It's about all catheter associated bloodstream infections. And I think about it as a buffet of vascular access or a continuum of vascular access. So by going back and looking at your outcomes for all of your infections, I suggest 12 months, but use whatever time frame works for you. Look at what devices are represented. Look at your time frame from insertion to infection to see if you're looking at more insertion related or care and maintenance related. Look at your pathogens. They may very well tell you a story of where some of your focuses need to be. You can look at individual locations through the hospital. And then some other basic things: patient bathing, tubing changes, dressing changes. If you're using antimicrobial products, are they used when appropriate? That's by actually going back and drilling into each of your cases. If you have access to your incident reporting system, your lab ID events, there's so many ways that you could get into this information. These are some of the things that we look at. I hope it's useful for me. I know so many of you have reached out. Please feel free to continue doing so. I feel this is truly one of the greatest things we've been able to introduce, and I hope at least many of you give it a try, give it a few months, and see what you can learn to help drive improvement forward, so that the story you tell will be one of saving lives. So whose life can you help save by getting together, by rounding, looking for opportunities and fixing those that you find? And I know we only have a very short time, so I'm going to end there, and I am happy to open for questions.
Thank you so much, Shelley. So very appreciative of all of the information that you've shared with us. It's just so great to see how you've been able to create this culture of collaboration and trust with your team to continually improve. So this concludes our presentation. For those of you who do have questions specifically for Shelley, do type them into the question box. Now's your opportunity to get those questions answered. Go ahead and type those right on in. And as I said, we will read them aloud to her. We have had a couple questions start to come in. Let me see what I can find here in just the few minutes that we have available. Okay, so you mentioned that your Jamboree team varies from month to month. Are there some consistent people or roles in the organization that are present around each month?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that question. And I believe we talked about that a little bit. It was in week 1. So our Jamboree team is led by myself and my amazing partner and secret sauce, Nancy Scott, who's also part of the infection prevention team. We are always there. Nursing professional development are among our strongest allies. They are always there. But sometimes we're able to bring in our nurse managers, our quality director, other individuals in the organization. The managers are very much engaged when they're present on the unit, but sometimes they're with patients. As far as our industry support, the individuals that we always include our dressing manufacturer, our gum mastic manufacturer, both our central lines and our peripheral lines, our antimicrobials. We use a CHG sponge, for instance. That's our core group. That being said, they're humans. And so there may be a time when an individual company is unable to attend. So we see that variation. Or sometimes after having a rep and a nurse there repeatedly, they'll want to bring in an engineer or an executive to help see things from a different standpoint. Or if we identified an opportunity for, I'm going to say we've brought in our TPA vendor once when we were talking about occlusion, and staff addressed some variation in their practices for dealing with occlusion. So the team has changed, sometimes in response to what we find during an original round. So that's some of the variation. I hope that helped answer the question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, next question. With current staffing issues in many hospitals that currently exist with travelers, new staff turnover, what are some recommendations for educating and evaluating these the staff and the policy implementation?
I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but I think the question is, we're all faced and still faced with a lot of staff turnover, a lot of travelers. And certainly when we go through, we try to identify the staff who are involved, for instance, when we have a bloodstream infection. And when we have had travelers or float staff involved, it's allowed us to go back and look at what our process is for onboarding. So when I said we've made changes to our practices, we're trying to ensure that when you join our organization, you receive that foundational knowledge regarding practices that are specific to our organization, as well as trying to create a strong structure on the unit level so that information gets threaded back through. I do think that's the universal reality for all of us, making sure that we're sharing information throughout the organization, regardless of this flux in staff. And I think it's something we will all continue to be faced with. I'm not sure I have a really strong answer there other than we have to keep trying. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you. One more question. What do you do if you observe a deviation from your policy while you're mid-round?
So thanks for that great question. We do engage the frontline staff. So if we find, I'm going to say tubing that is disconnected and hanging free to the wind, I think that's the easy target. We will talk to the staff. We will actually pull the tubing down. We'll explain to them why there was a deviation from practice, and we actually engage them and do just-in-time teaching. So a lot of it, depending what it is, we're not going to discuss in front of the patient, but we'll take it into the hallway. We'll grab the individual nurse if she hasn't been with us at the bedside, and we will correct it. A number of the things are things that really do need to be corrected immediately, and we don't leave the unit until they're corrected. Other things, it's more of a we'll pass it off during our debrief. But if it's something that's a patient safety concern, we stay there until it's corrected.
Thank you, appreciate that. And just one final question. When you shared the evidence that you've collected from your rounds, you mentioned a combination of a dressing and gum mastic to have those greater incidence of intact dressing. Did you also change anything related to removal to ensure that that doesn't cause any implications or harm to the patient?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for bringing that up, whoever asked that. At the same time we added gum mastic, we did standardize to a different adhesive remover. So we use Mastisol, and that is used in conjunction with Detachol. Our storerooms were all supplied with Detachol. Our procedures and policies and education were updated to really emphasize the importance of using an adhesive remover, not just with our products that we've added Mastisol with, but to all adhesive products. We monitor that because it was a question that came up. And so through our incident reports, we partnered very strongly with our WOCNs, or wound and ostomy nurses, to make sure that when we add this enhancement, that's also part of post-implementation monitoring. So it's great that we got the dressings more adherent. If we were causing skin injury, that would be the opposite of what we wanted to achieve. So our wound nurses were involved heavily with us to ensure that not only were we getting our outcomes, but we weren't creating additional concern. And that was part of our ongoing monitoring. And yes, it is absolutely used in conjunction with an adhesive remover.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Well, we're just a little over time. Thank you so much, Shelley, for being here today, for your commitment to helping others throughout this series, providing practical information on how the Jamboree started, and as we learned today, why it's so important to keep it going on an ongoing basis. So to the audience, on behalf of EleQuest Healthcare, I'd really like to thank you all for attending this Wednesday workshop. If you found it helpful, please feel free to share the recording link with your colleagues and friends. Each session is or will be available in a recorded format. So for those of you who like to binge things back to back, you can do that in that fashion and share it with your friends to do so. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you at a future Wednesday workshop event.